Hello. It is good to be back with you guys. This should be Tuesday, theoretically, if everything's working out fine. No clue where I'm at this point in time because obviously this is all being filmed beforehand. So at this point, I'm either on my way home, I'm dead, I've shot an elk, I've found an elk, I was attacked by an elk. Well, a plethora of options, I guess, at this point in time. But hopefully, my father and I are enjoying our time and being safe. And um, one of those things that I've looked forward to for a long time, especially having a chance to spend time with him. And so today we are going to continue a study of Exodus. There are several things that you were asked about on our last test that you at least saw on your study guide that maybe perhaps we didn't discuss. And I'm fine with that because it's open Bible and you had time to look at it on your study guide. But I do want to be clear about a few things. And so that's kind of where I want to begin today. Is talking specifically about some of the whys. Knowing that they collected manna after the sixth day is one thing, and you got that right on your test, hopefully. But knowing why it matters is more important. And so we're going to spend some time today looking at that, kind of pouring ourselves through Exodus. We're about to get into a situation where some of the stuff that we talk about is very difficult to discuss. And it's mainly difficult because it's boring. And I'm not saying that in a negative connotation. It's difficult because we're going to start talking about the ideas of what's going to be built for the tabernacle and rules and laws that exist after that were handed down at Mount Sinai. So all of those things are going to kind of create for us a little bit of difficulty to pay attention. So that means my usual people that are asleep, right side of the room, and the usual people who are talking, left side of the room. Let's try to control ourselves as we go through this material. Stay awake, stay alert, know what's up, all that kind of good stuff, and then we'll get through all this together. Okay? So, if you will, turn to Exodus 16. You should have already had Bibles out. If you don't, then you're being a bad example in front of a substitute. That's obviously my rule. Have your stuff together. Don't be yelling in class, and pay attention. It's just that simple. If I'm speaking, that means it's something that you need to know, and not just some random stuff that I'm telling you. Let's look, if we can, at chapter 16, and I want us to notice what happens here in verse 3. So the people of Israel said to them, "Would that we have died in the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." You're going to spend a large portion of time very unhappy with these people. You will be unhappy with their desire to do what they want to do. You will be unhappy to see their desire to be ungrateful for what God did. And I don't want us to miss that point because it's easy to sit back in our judge's chair and talk about how awful those people are. It's a lot harder to be honest with ourselves and realize that we do this same thing. We repeatedly find ourselves choosing to say, you know what, you haven't given me enough. Mom and dad, school, teachers, friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, and especially God, that what we have is not enough of what we want. I don't know how else to say as we read through this, as you see God's people be not really good people, we should be very, very, very quick to point fingers at ourselves before we point them at other people. It doesn't mean that we're not shocked and appalled at times by God's people. He gives them water, they don't like it. He gives them more water, they don't like it. He gives them bread, they just eat bread. He gives them quail, now there's too much meat. It is kind of awful to see them do this. But at the same time, I think we should be able to admit to ourselves that we do this same thing too. So I want you to notice, though, what God does as he gives things to the people. And guess what? He does the same thing to us. Look for me, if you will, at verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I'm about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not." Chapter 16. Let me ask this question if I can. Wesley, Is this before or after the giving of the Ten Commandments? Nice job, Wesley. It's before. It's before the giving of the Ten Commandments. I want you to think about this, if you will, for me. If this is before, are you trying to tell me that God wants his people to obey him in certain aspects and ways and whatever else it may be? Are you trying to tell me that he wants that from these people before he gave them a law? Yes. He wants to see whether or not they care. He wants to see whether or not they'll make some effort to listen to what he says. So notice what he told them to do. He says he wants them to gather a day's amount of food. Look at where, if you continue to read. It says, on the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much, right, as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to the people, at evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us? Here's another lesson for us. He says, what does it matter if you grumble against Moses and Aaron? Because he says, it's not in our charge to even deal with it. We can't fix it. So he says, when you complain about Moses and Aaron, you really complain about God. So I'm going to go ahead and let you know, and this may hurt feelings, but that same thing applies when we complain about teachers doing things for us, when we complain about parents doing things for us, when we complain about friends and family and church members and whatever else. When we stand before those people and say, you didn't do enough for me, the real truth is that you're saying God didn't do enough for you, because God uses the people in your life to do those things. And just like he has made the promise that he would take care of Solomon, and just like he clothed Solomon, as he says, in all his glory, just like James says, he says, why do you worry about these things? Because the birds of the air, they toil not, the flowers, they don't work, and yet it says they were, nothing on this earth is as beautiful as those flowers are. Not even Solomon in all of his garb was as beautiful as those flowers are, and they don't do anything for that. Why? Because God just gives it to them. So here Moses and Aaron says, well, you weren't complaining about us, you were complaining about God. And here's what he says. Look there, if you will, in verse 8. When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him. What are we? You grumble. Your grumbling is not against us, but is against the Lord. So here's what he says. Say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, come near to the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. As soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people, they looked towards the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. You shall take an omer, according to the number of persons that you have in his tent. So in other words, he says, I want you to, hey, guess what? My Amazon package was delivered. That's fantastic. He says, I need you to gather what you need per person, an omer. So in other words, he's saying a measuring device. Think of it like a cupful, however much an omer was at the time. But its purpose was that it was only going to be that much per person based on how many people were in the tent. Again, what was the point of this? What was the reason? It was to test them, to see whether or not they would listen to the Lord, to see whether or not they would obey, to see whether or not they'd pay attention. It's literally what it was. Look what happens. People of Israel did so. They gathered, some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it over till the morning. But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. Remember it again, children. Why on earth does God continue to allow things to stink in front of the people? It's a reminder. That's right. It tells them, could you pay more attention? Right? God's people are failing at the most simplistic of tasks. And here's the crazy thing: you're about to have the law given to the people that, as we'll see in a moment, it's not easy to even listen to. It's not easy to even think about what's being asked of them. And the reality is that these people are being exposed to small tests on a daily basis, and they continue to choose to fail them. So it makes you ask yourself questions about your own life, whether or not you're being tested in the things that you experience. Some of you have difficulties at home. Some of you got difficulties with parents, and with parents having divorce or separation, and brothers and sisters, and drug and alcohol addiction, and whatever else it may be. You have these difficulties, these struggles, these things that have happened. Some of you have been diagnosed with sicknesses, and you're taking medication, and none of your student friends are doing those things. And maybe perhaps it's just a test. Maybe it's a test when I say, I want you to go home and finish your notes to page 85. That's not an assignment for tonight. But to finish your notes to page 85, and tomorrow I'll take them up. And it's a test that you show up without it done. Maybe that's a test, and unfortunately, maybe that's just a test that I'm giving you because God's using me to see whether or not you want to be obedient. Sitting in front of us is example after example of God's people being disobedient. It shouldn't take much for us to make the decision to not be those people. Just use them as an example. Use their failures and their mistakes and just say, I won't do the same thing. I'm not going to. I'm smarter than that. I think you are. But that only applies if we're trying to be, if we're choosing to be. I want you to look down in verse 22. It says that on the sixth day they gathered twice as much. Why? What did God do on day 7? He rested. Remember, the Sabbath day is going to be an important thing for the people, right? A day of rest. So because of that, they were to gather on day 6 twice as much. That way they wouldn't gather anything on day 7. Do you want to go ahead and take a stab at the dark what's going to happen with some of these people on day 7? Look for me, if you will. And look at verse 22. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So they laid it aside the morning, and Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. So in other words, what was left over after day 6 did not rot, because it was needed for day 7. Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the 7th day, which is Sabbath, there will be none. And on the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. Shocker. Again, you can basically throw a dart at an Old Testament verse and find God's people being disobedient. Just close your eyes and wing it. It's okay. You'll find a spot somewhere near where that arrow lands. You will have your eyes open to God's people just not being smart. So what I want us to do is, as we read through this, as we see the failures of the people, let's not be judgmental. Let's be judgmental towards ourselves in the sense of being self-examining. Are we also this way? And then thirdly, or C, let's please do our best to learn from their mistakes, to be better people. Look at chapter 17, verse 2. People quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us? So our children and our livestock with thirst. So Moses cried to the Lord, what shall I do with this people? You ever had anybody say this? You ever had a teacher throw their arms up and just go, I don't know what else to do with you? Here you go. It's the same thing Moses is dealing with. He can't figure it out anymore. He's done. Look at verse 5. And the Lord said to Moses, pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Oreb, and you shall strike the rock, and the water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord among us or not? Did God continue to provide for his people? Yes. The first time that we received water was back at Marah. You remember that, I think, in chapter 15, verse 22. That was where the water was bitter. He threw a log in and made it sweet. Well, that ain't Moses being awesome. That's God doing that, obviously. And then you have then in chapter 17, the second time that we have water, and this is water that's not already there. It's water that's produced from nothing. And if you don't happen to know of all the places to get water from, a rock is the place that it ain't coming from under any circumstances. And yet it shows up here. Water from a rock. Why? Well, because God can do anything that he wants to do. It's that simple. In this case, he told Moses to strike the rock. Moses struck the rock, and water poured forth. Of course, you can see that written for you there. Chapter 18, we talked about Jethro's advice a little bit as we went over some of our notes. Remember, Jethro was the father-in-law, right, of Moses. Moses basically stood as a judge over the people. And so his job was to take care of any issues that they had. I mean, look, there's thousands of them. They're all going to have issues. Somebody's ox ran away. Somebody stole somebody's camel. Somebody's camel, decided to eat the hay of so-and-so's, goat, and their goat died because they were starving to death. There's issues nonstop that are going to go on. And so Moses has to deal with these things. And basically, Jethro comes to him and offers some advice that I think is really, really good and something that seems to be very important. Look at verse 6. When he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all the Lord had done in Pharaoh and the Egyptians and all the hardship that had come upon them in the way. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that he had done. Jethro said, blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh. Verse 11. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread, and Moses' father-in-law before God. So in other words, he says, thank goodness, God did exactly what was great and awesome. And remember, we've already been told, the point of God doing the things he did in Egypt was not so that Pharaoh could see how awesome God was. It wasn't so that Moses could see how awesome that God was. As a matter of fact, it was not so that the Israelites would see how awesome God was. It was so that the world would see how awesome God was, how powerful and how mighty. In this case, here's Jethro. Jethro has now learned of what's happened. He's seen the greatness that existed. He's seen the power that is there in God's people coming out. So because of that, he's pretty excited, I would say, that this has occurred. And he desires greatly to offer something to God to say, thank you for what you've done, more or less. And so here's what he's going to do. He's going to make a sacrifice, and he's going to praise God for his greatness, even though he wasn't part of that, right? What winds up happening then is that he watches Moses go through his day-to-day activities. Look at verse 13. The next day, Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw that he was what he was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all people stand around you from morning till evening? He says, what are you, like, I can't even get to you. What are you doing? You seem really busy, what Jethro says. Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them known the statutes of God and his laws. And Moses' father-in-law said to him, what you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. Jethro just simply says, Moses, man, you're killing yourself. This is too much. God's people are going to be upset with you because you basically have tried to do it yourself and you didn't have enough time to get it all done. You're going to be exhausted and die because of all of this work that you do. So Jethro says, why would you do this? So Jethro gives him some pretty sound advice. He just very simply says, you need to appoint some people to do this for you. He says, Moses, of the most difficult things, you still judge. But then of the things that are, let's say, next in line to difficulty, have some higher judges judge those things. And the things that are small things, have some lower judges judge those things. And so he says, put these people in charge of 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people. He says, and then let the issues that need to be resolved because they finally have to make it to you, let those issues finally come to you. Well, look, do y'all not realize that our entire judicial system is primarily built On that same idea, we have a Supreme Court for a reason. Supreme Court's job primarily is supposed to be to maintain issues of constitution, to maintain whether or not the Constitution does or doesn't say something, or whether or not the case that was done or that is going on happens to be against the Constitution or happens to have nothing to do with the Constitution. That's their job. Well, guess what? If they took care of every case that happened, they would never deal with those issues. So what do we have? Well, you have state, right? You have federal courts in this nation. You have then state courts in each state. You have got county seats and all these different types of things, all these little bitty courts and trials. And so, if somebody stole a pack of gum, then perhaps they're over here, having, court in our cafeteria, at CA so that we can, determine whether or not they did it and then, send down some punishment. At the same time, if somebody happened to have, gone in and stolen something at Walmart, well, maybe it's just a court thing that happens here at Hazelhurst. Somebody did so with a gun, and it becomes a federal issue, and it becomes a federal case, and they are in the federal trial system. So the same thing happened here. Jethro just says, Moses, don't do this way. Do something to help yourself out, to make it easier on you. So he goes through that process and very much does so. And God's people are the better for it because of it. Look at chapter 19. We've seen God's people already get to Mount Sinai. We've kind of already studied that. And we see all that takes place there as they're supposed to be there. Remember some things that are very, very important. Look at verse 21. Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people lest they break through to the Lord to look, and many of them perish. And let the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, let the Lord break out against them. And Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you yourself warned us, saying, set limits around the mountain and consecrate it. And the Lord said to him, go down and come up, bringing Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come to the Lord, lest he break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and told them. In other words, they went to the mountain. He's about to receive the law. And very simply, there's one powerful statement that's made, and that is, no person besides those in which the Lord has sent up the mountain should touch that mountain. Everyone else should stay away. The moment in which they even touch it, they're going to die. And so he's very clear about that. He's basically telling them to stay far, far away. And of course, the people do. They just sadly do something else instead. I'm not going to go over the 10 Commandments there in chapter 20. We talked about those as we went and wrote those down in our notes. Shouldn't be too difficult to understand the idea and the concept behind that. These 10 Commandments, unfortunately, became, for most people, not of Jewish heritage and of the Israelites, became the law. And I want you to understand that the 10 Commandments are not even a tenth of the law. Nowhere close. The 10 Commandments, unfortunately, have been raised as some greater than everything else group of statutes. It's not to say they're not important. It's not to say that they didn't help to guide God's people. But the law that was handed down to him was not a law that was just solely about those 10 Commandments. It was about a whole lot of other stuff. Some stuff that we'll read here in Exodus, and a whole bunch of stuff that we'll read in Leviticus, Deuteronomy, as the laws laid down. To think of God's law as simplistic as 10 rules really sells short what he did. Does it mean that we could have listened to those 10 and probably kept ourselves out of trouble? Yeah, we could have. At the same time, there were still rules and regulations for God's people that they had to hold to that those 10 would not have fixed. It wouldn't have been enough. When you talk about your ox gorging a pregnant woman and the baby doesn't die, but it does hurt the baby, and so now all you owe back is to help pay for whatever she thinks it's worth, or the husband thinks it's worth it. Or that you gorged the pregnant woman and the baby did die, and because of that it was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Those things you don't see in these 10 Commandments. You don't. So I want us to not get this concept lost in our heads. When I say law, I don't mean 10 Commandments. When I say 10 Commandments, I mean 10 Commandments. But when I say law, we're talking about everything that God has laid down. So Moses is up on the mountain. Moses being given the law. It's being written down on tablets of stone here for him. It seems apparent that Moses was the one who went through the process of writing those things on the stone, at least initially. And then it seems very much so like God was the one who recorded those things after that point. So look at verse 18 of chapter 20. It says, now when all the people saw the thunders and flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoke, and the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. The people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. Then look at verse 22 and following. Look at the headings, if you will, in your Bible. Above 22. Laws about what? Altars. Look at 21. Laws about what? Slaves. I mean, let's just look at some of these if we can. Look at verse 16. Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death. Number 17. Whoever curses his father or his mother will be put to death. 18. When men quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and the man does not die, but takes to his bed, then if the man rises again and walks outdoors with his staff, he who struck him shall be clear. Only he shall pay for the loss of time and shall have him thoroughly healed. So that means when I slap poor Connor over here, Connor, if he doesn't die and he has to go home and rest in the bed because I hurt him that bad, what that means is that then I need to repay him for whatever time was lost while he was recuperating. These things go on over and over and over. Look at 22. Men strive together to hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm. The one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. So in other words, it says you harm the child, didn't kill a child. Husband says it's worth 7 goats and 5, llamas. Then that's what it's worth. The judges said it was worth more than that, then he would also pay what the judges said. But look at verse 23. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, or stripe for stripe. In other words, if you were to do that to the child and the child came out minus a finger, well, they'd expect you to lose a finger. The child came out blind, to come out blind. If the child came out dead, then to lose a life. Look at verse 26. For when a man strikes the eye of his slave, male or female, and destroys it, he shall let the slave go free because of his eye. In other words, if you were to hit your slave hard enough to make him go blind in an eye, he gets to go free. He's not a slave anymore because you've stolen his eye from him, is what he's saying. In other words, there's so much stuff that's recorded over these next things. Look at the restitution that you see there in verse 33 and following down. Restitution means how to make something right. Look at verse 5. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed over. So what this means is that I accidentally allowed my cattle to go next door to my neighbor, and they ate all the grass. That's what that means, okay? Grazed over. It says, or lets his beast loose, and it feeds in another man's field. He shall make restitution from the beast of his own field and his own vineyard. Oops, my bad. So I got to make it up. I got to give the man bales of hay or whatever it is, something. If a fire breaks out, it catches in thorns, so that the stacked grain of the standing grain of the field is consumed. Who started the fire shall make full restitution. I'm out at a bonfire, and I wasn't paying attention. I burned down my neighbor's hay. It's on me to make that right. Again, I want you to see how crazy it is that we take the law that was given there on the mountain and we turn it into this thing where we're like, oh, it was small, no big deal, didn't really do much. No, it's huge. It's massive amounts of laws and regulations that these people had to pay attention to and to take care of. You see social justice there in chapter 16, right? 18, you shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. We understand what the idea of lies there means. That means they are with them intimately, as a man and a woman are to be together. They chose to do that with an animal. What does he say about that? Well, we define that as bestiality. He says they should be put to death. 20. Whoever sacrifices to any other god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. Right? Look at 25. If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like the moneylender to him, and you shall not exact interest for him. So you know what that means? That means when Peyton decides to give me $10, Peyton doesn't get to say in 2 weeks when I hadn't paid him back, he doesn't get to say, well, now you owe me 11. He says God's people here should have done what? They should lend that money, and they basically should be willing to take that back without interest, not like a moneylender would do. Now, can I go ahead and tell you something real quick? I'm going to solve 25% of the problems in your life from now on. If you ever lend someone money, don't. I know that sounds really funny, because what I just got through saying was, I didn't say don't lend people money. I said if you ever lend someone money, don't. What that means is that when you give that money to them, it's no longer you lending it. They think it is, but it's not. It's you giving it away. Don't ever expect it to return. Don't ever expect to see it again. Don't ever expect to have it back. If someone were to repay you, great. But if you were willing to lend that money because someone needed it, if you were willing to lend that money to a family member or whatever else, do not lend it. Give it to them. It's fine. And then ignore the fact that they owe it back. Don't hold a grudge. Don't ask for it back. Don't ask why it's not there. The fastest way to struggle, to find yourself struggling in this world, is for you to be willing to turn to people that care about you or that you care about and to loan them money and then to try to hold that over them. It's not worth it for your spouse. It's not worth it for your brothers and sisters. It's not worth it for your parents. It's not worth it for your grandparents. It's not worth it for friends. So either don't lend the money. Either say you don't have it and you don't have it. Or if you get ready to lend it, then just don't. Simply give it away and say it's done. At $800, at $8,000, at $80,000, whatever it is, it's no longer mine. I gave that to somebody else who I believe needed, who I wanted to help. I did that to help them. Excellent. Glad you did. Now the reality is that you let it go. It's very simple. You keep that concept in the top of your brain, I promise you, you'll find yourself not in trouble very frequently. Look for me at verse 10 of chapter 23. Here's some more, right? For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its yield. But in the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. What do they do on year 7? Nothing. They don't plant, they don't do anything. Why would the poor be able to reap the benefits of that? Well, because if you happen to know anything whatsoever about growing seed, once you go out there and scatter seed, not all the seed is going to grow up that year. So unless you re-tilled it back over, unless you poisoned it, something will regrow the next year. So he's saying, don't go do anything to the land. After the 6th year, leave it alone. Let it rest. The poor and the animals that exist in your current area can live off of that field for that year. God won't just take care of the poor and the distressed because of that. He'll do so in many other ways, but that's one of the ways that he did so. Look at verse 12. 6 days you should do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. Now, that is a 10th commandment, right? Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. But here is more detail being given about that event, right? So that we can keep up with what it is. Now, go back, if you will, at chapter 23 and look at verse 20. It says, Behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Pay careful attention to him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. But if you carefully obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. Okay? So, when my angel goes before you and brings you to the Amorites, the Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, the Hivites, and Jebusites, I blot them out. You shall not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do as they do. But you shall utterly overthrow them and break their pillars in pieces. You shall serve the Lord your God. He will bless you in your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from among you. None shall miscarry or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my terror before you, and will throw into confusion all the people whom you shall come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I will, notice this, send hornets before you, that I shall drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites from before you. I will not drive them out before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate, and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you, until you have increased and possessed the land. And I will set your border from the Red Sea to the sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the Euphrates. For I will give the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you, and you shall make no covenant with them and their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, I will scarcely be a snare to you. Or surely, be a snare to you. If you can't see the great foreshadowing that is about to take place right here for God's people, you just aren't paying attention. He literally tells them, I got a news flash for you. That news flash is very simply this: I will lead you into Canaan, but you must do one thing. You must utterly destroy, drive out, have no part in, take no part in, not make friends with, not marry, not serve the gods that exist of the people that are in that land. Because if you do, he says, I will surely be a snare, a trap. That's what he means by snare to you. He says, but if you get out of the way, he says, I'll even drive the Hivites and the Canaanites out by sending hornets before you to drive these people out. And he's even so good at them that he says, I won't drive them out a year in advance, because if I did that, then, for instance, all the fields that they were growing, they'd get overgrown. And then wild beasts would come in. You have to go fight the wild beasts to get them out of there. No. I'll keep the place pristine and perfect, because I'll drive them out slowly by surely as you grow in numbers and as you overtake. But you just have to get rid of the people. Refuse to serve their gods. Not become friends, not love, not care, not hang out with, not play shuffleboard, whatever. Doesn't matter what it is. He says, don't do it. Do you think God's people are going to listen? You already know the answer. Do you think this will cost them a whole lot? You better believe it will. And unfortunately for that, we're going to see a big falling out, right, of what takes place with his people. And we're going to see a big falling out with really what takes place with God and his own people, how much he loves them. Moses is going to struggle to manage them. Once Moses doesn't, Aaron will try, and then God will raise judges after judges after judges after judges to take care of them, and eventually they'll ask for a king. And they do all this because they had a better solution by just following him, and they chose not to. And at this point, there's really no solution. There's no solution besides sitting back and learning from their mistakes, learning from what they did that they shouldn't have done, and giving us the ability to stop and to see how mistakes themselves can be so detrimental to our life. I want us, as we prepare to close, that doesn't mean put your stuff up. I want us to be people who can be honest with ourselves enough to say that we know full well what is expected of us. And I'm not asking us to be perfect. I'm not. I'm not asking you to be something that I can't be. I will tell you that Scripture tells us to be perfect. Be ye perfect, therefore, as your Heavenly Father is perfect. So we're commanded to be that way. We're only made that way through the washing of blood from Christ. However, we do have the ability to learn very important lessons from these people. You know, you make decisions who you hang out with and spend time with, do you not? Do those people ever influence you to determine what you do on a Friday and a Saturday night? They do, don't they? The person that you choose to hang out with, that's your boyfriend and girlfriend with, does that person affect you in any capacity whatsoever regarding your own life and how you live? So let me just say this. If you can see God's people choose the wrong people to keep around them, people that drew their hearts away from the Lord, and you can see the detriment and the fall and the difficulties that happen because of what they chose to do, Is there any reason on this planet that we would repeat that same process? I want you to learn one thing if you learn anything from me over the course of this year. I want you to stop caring what your friends think about what you do. If those friends aren't people who have your best interests spiritually at heart, find new people. If your friend allows you to vape on the weekend, if your friend doesn't care what you look at on your phone that you shouldn't be looking at, if your friend's okay with you typing F-bombs and whatever else you want to type on an Instagram account or somebody's text messages or whatever else it may be, if your friend is perfectly okay with you bullying and picking on people, if your friend is perfectly okay with you failing tests because you aren't putting any effort into it, if your friend is perfectly okay with you going to a football team or a baseball team and giving no effort, if that's the friend that you have, I want you to know something. You chose the same people that the Israelites chose. It was miserable for them. We're about to see every book that exists from here on out and the misery that exists because of their choice as they enter into the land of Canaan. Why would you repeat that process? So because of that, I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you to think about who it is that you spend time with. I want to challenge you to think about who it is that you call a friend of yours. And I want you to be honest with yourself. If that friend hears you say a word you shouldn't, if that friend hears you treat somebody awfully with disrespect, if that friend sees you take something or do something or smoke something or whatever else it is that you shouldn't be doing, and that friend says to you, you're better than that. That friend says to you, I'm not going to be part of that. That friend says to you, God wouldn't want you doing that. That's the guy that you latch on to. That's the girl that you hold hands with, that you lock arms with, and you say, I'm going to have you help me through life. That's a true friend. A true friend doesn't just let you do what you want because, it makes you happy. It's not a true friend. Not in the slightest. I hope today we learned some important things about God's people, but more importantly about ourselves. I want us to see ourselves in their shoes. What do we do about it? How do we survive? How do we function? We have the ability to make the right decisions. I want us to do so each and every day. Remember, you have got some work that you're going to continue to do for me tomorrow. Got another lecture for you coming up on Thursday. I expect all that stuff to be done. I'm going to be grading everything basically that you do for me while I'm gone. Hopefully none of this even gets shown and I'm back at school on Tuesday morning. I highly doubt that will happen because that would have meant that my father and I were extremely successful and home early. But if it happens, it happens. I'll look forward to being back with you. If not, I'm going to see you on the Monday when I get back and look forward to seeing you then too. I hope you guys have a good day. If there's still time left in this classroom, you know what you should be doing. You should quietly be sitting or working on something else until that bell goes off. Don't be that person who doesn't know what's going on. Okay? Everybody understand? Look forward to seeing you on Tuesday or Thursday again if you see my face on video. And I hope that you guys have a blessed day.